Hello everyone, my name is Dale, welcome back to Inception Gaming, where we are making a how-to map on how to basically create a custom map in Timberborn that a player will enjoy. That is a high detailed, it's got all of the peaks and troughs going on the terrain and the riverbeds and whatever else. We've got reservoirs going on, a simple starting area going on, and this video is going to be covering water depth, rivers and lakes. Alright guys, so to start off, the first thing we're going to look at is this river that we've got going on around here. Now, rivers consist of a couple of main fundamental features, okay? Most rivers will always have a rocky section. They'll always have a relatively deep riverbed if they're quite narrow, but if they're wide, then they normally have quite a shallow riverbed. And then the other thing that a river typically have as well is little offshoots that are feeding into this river that we can go ahead and cover off as well. So the first thing we're going to look at is how wide we want this riverbed from start all the way to finish. Now, every single river will always start narrower than how it ends. That is just a physical fact of a river, okay? The longer the river goes on, the more water is feeding into it, the further down the river you get. And so naturally, you have to have a larger river towards the end of it, which is how obviously you get estuaries and things like that in real life. Now, looking at how we've started this river out, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to delete two of these. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're starting off 5 wide. So let's go ahead and create this 5 high. And we're just going to go ahead. This actually needs to be brush height 5. Yeah. Oh, that's brush size. Okay, brush height 5. There we go. Okay. So we're just going to go ahead and shrink this river at this point a little bit, just around that corner as well. And over on this side, we're going to go ahead and just push in the river at this section, making it really narrow up here. And then obviously later on, it's going to get wider and wider and wider as the river flows. So this starting section here, we just need to go ahead and make our brush size a little bit smaller, just so that we can sort this section out here. And we'll just go ahead and pull it up a little bit like that, okay? And even with things like this, we can go ahead and just add small little gates here. Now that is going to change the water flow in a way where this section will always be a little bit deeper than this section, because there's more water feeding into this section than there is in the next section. Now, whenever I'm working with water, guys, I always triple the speed on the custom map editor, and that is just because the water just updates faster and you can see what's going on as you do it. Now, looking at it, this is a bit of a weird shape, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to follow that along, create it narrow. We're going to get rid of this, and we're just going to have that slight curve there. We're going to get rid of a few bits of these here as well. Let's just pull that away just a little bit to make that curve a little bit more sensical. Let's go ahead and just drop them back as well. This section here, it's just not gonna, it just doesn't look great. I'm going to go ahead and take that out a little bit. Drop that back. We've gone wide, and then we've gone narrow again. We don't really want that, because that just wouldn't really happen naturally. So we'll take out the curve a little bit more. It's widening and widening and widening, and then it's at its widest point. And you can even make it even wider further down, where it's going right out wide, a little bit more like that towards the end. And that way we've got a slightly narrow start and a slightly wider finish, and it just makes it look a little bit more natural in appearance. So looking at the depth of this river then, guys, it's super simple to do this. This tool here, this terrain height relative, is going to be your best friend for this. And always just work on brush size 1, brush height 1. If you go to brush size 2, if you add a block, it'll add 2 blocks, which is not really going to be something you want to do. If you go to brush height 1, every time you click on a block, it's just going to add or take away 1 block, which is what we're after. Now, the easiest way to go ahead and start this off is take out the bulk of the blocks first, and then go ahead and do the fine detailing afterwards, right? So I'm just going to start. I know I just said stay on brush size 1, but I'm just going to start. I'm just going to take out the bulk of the stuff so that we don't have to do a lot of work. I'm just going to go ahead and feed this through the center. At this point, we're playing with fire because we're coming close to the edge. I'm just going to go down to brush size 1. I'm literally, I accidentally did that then. And I'm just going to go ahead, and I'm just going to follow this along dead central to the river, just like this, all the way down, and probably to about there. We don't want to come too much closer, because obviously the water sources aren't going to be on anything that makes a lot of sense. And then literally you're just going to pick a side. So at the moment this water is all feeding into here, which is a very clear indicator that we don't have enough water flow coming in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to up every single one of these to 2. And we're just going to see at what point the river actually fully fills up. So this is what I mean. So even with all of them at 2, got a little bit more water flow coming in here now. It's going to push that along a little bit, hopefully. But it actually isn't. So there's not a great deal of water flow. But even that is 10 units of water flow, which is actually quite a lot. So what that would mean is that when we edit this now, things are going to seriously start to change. So pick a side, right side of the river or left side of the river, guys, and we'll just go ahead and start on that. So literally, I'm just going to probably time lapse this. It takes a little bit of time to do. You're just going to edge it away. This first level, you're just going to edge it away, and you're going to try to stay really close to this edge. Sometimes even being quite brutal with actually being on the edge, but you'll see that in the time lapse. So yeah, here we go. Alright guys, so that is the first level done. And what you'll notice is I've gone quite close to the edge of some, so you've got cliffs in some places and you've just got little step downs in others. Now, taking the water away, we're sort of looking at that kind of a shape. So we've just got little one bits going on all over the place, all over here as well. And then literally the next thing you do, guys, is you're just going to do the same thing again, just on the next level down. So just go in the dead center of this. This is where you're definitely going to want to stick on a brush thickness of 1. And just follow that all the way along, all the way up. And even when you get to these wider parts at this point, start following all of this along until you get to the center there. So you've just got your center line to work with again. Now, the reason that I've said to stay on brush 1 is because at this point, you're going to start to shallow out the riverbed at the bottom. So you obviously don't want it to just be a dead straight cliff down in a diagonal line. So you're not going to want this to just go straight into a point. You're actually going to want the curve of a natural riverbed that you would get. Now, to do that, you're going to go really brutal on the first layer. You're going to go relatively close on the second layer. So if I was to go down on this layer now, I'm probably going to go something like this for this side, so that you're actually getting a lot more blocks on this next level. So I wouldn't ever go into there like that, because that's just too steep still. I'm actually just going to leave that line in. And you're just going to do this all the way along again, going down. And you're just going to want to make sure that you're leaving a lot more blocks at this point close to the edge of this river. So again, I'm just going to time lapse this, guys, and you can see what it all looks like. So we've got something a little bit like that now. Now you'll notice over here we've got a problem because obviously we're a much narrower river here, meaning that I had to actually put some blocks back in. And in fact, I'm going to put a few more back in as well because we're still looking a little bit cliffy over in this section. And that's absolutely fine. It's going to be expected. A river that's this narrow wouldn't ever be as deep as a river as this one over here. And that's just classic rules of erosion when you get the actual natural world into account. So when you've got a slightly thinner and narrower river at the start, it's to be expected that it's never going to be able to go as deep as the wider and larger parts, because at this point we've actually got space to go down one more here, which is absolutely brilliant. And we're going to take that right up to probably about there. Okay. Now what I always like to do with my rivers, guys, is I always like to have the natural flow going all the way through, and then around a halfway point I like to throw in a really rocky section, which I'll show you how to do that in a second. So I'm probably not even going to need to time lapse this. It's not going to take long to sort out at all. I'm just going to come around, I'm just going to take out and put in a few more blocks here. I'm actually going to put in quite a few around this section because of just how thin and narrow this is. I'm only going to take out the odd one. Like here, this is quite thin. This is actually quite. I think I've gone too far up here actually. So let's just look at what we've got. I'm just going to take out the odd block every now and then. Even at this point, we're quite narrow even here as well. And just try not to make it look too repetitive. So there's no pattern to it. there is a bit of randomness to it. You've not got like just one block and then one block and then one block and then one block or anything like that. You've got these little 2 bits and 3s and corner pieces and whatever else. I'm going to throw another one in there. And that's probably looking pretty good. I'm just going to throw in a few other random little bits here just to make it look a little bit more jagged. Probably going to put that one back in and take that one out instead. And then this is obviously where the water is going to be exiting. Now that is absolutely fine. In terms of water flow, we're really good up to this point here. And then the water flow is really dropping when we're getting a little bit wider, which is naturally expected because obviously the river has carved out the path through the landscape, which is excellent. It's what we want. And what you can clearly see is that at this point we've got 3 blocks away from this top surface here, whereas at the start we're literally on that top surface, which naturally would happen because every river in every location on Earth always flows downhill, which is what we've got going on here, which is perfect. Now coming over to this middle section here, where we've got a little bit of a straight and narrow part, this is where you can go ahead and add in a lot of that rockiness, and you'll notice what actually happens to the water flow when we do this. Now the best way to do this, guys, is to grab your terrain height relative tool, not the absolute tool, the relative tool. And I'm not even kidding, just take this first surface here, okay, this one row, and if you're going to do it, pick the side of the river where you've got the outside arc, not this inside arc, because if you think the river is coming this way, all of the pressure of the water is coming up on this side. So I'm just going to go ahead and start taking away a couple of these bits here, making this part of the river a little bit narrower, wider at the top. And that is just so that we can go ahead and add in a lot of other tiny random blocks later on. I'm actually going to make that bit extra wide here as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and carve out a little bit more on this bit here on that row, okay? So we're just giving ourselves more space there, even though the actual river itself hasn't been made that much wider if you're looking at it like this. And what we're going to do with this now that we've got all this open space here, is again terrain height relative, brush size 1, brush height 1, and just default it to increase as well. And then literally coming along this edge, just start clicking random points. Try not to hold the mouse button down. Then just go onto the bottom floor and start spamming these in just at random points. And then again onto the next level. And we're just going to keep on adding random little bits. And then at this level as well, we're going to add lots of random little bits like that as well, okay? And that is going to create just a slightly different area to the river, where we've got some harder resources that the river's trying to cut through that it just can't. And you can be as creative as you like with this. So if you're looking for these little islands more in the middle here, you can do that, but just bear in mind that the natural course of a river needs to be relatively empty, because you only really get like larger islands where it's like split in two. You don't actually get these rocky parts. They're like dead central of a river, because the water flow would have just chopped that rock away quite quickly. So if you want to do it, be quite sparing and keep it relatively close to the edges like that, so that you've got this central column still. Like these two here, I'm actually going to get rid of them. They don't really make a lot of sense. And then you'll notice what's happened to the water flow of the river is that this has actually filled up a lot more and is now up to here on that top section, which is really, really nice. And you've also got these little few rocks here that actually aren't underwater, which is also quite cool. And you can add in a few more of them if you want to further down, just to ease out that little rocky section. And that's just something I like to do. It's just something a little detail that I like to have on the rivers, just to make them a little bit more interesting. Now, where it gets fun for the player down here is that they can start damming over here. So if they were to go ahead and they were to have, I don't know, let's say that they were to dam this section here, they're actually going to go and dam that, and then this section's all going to rise up, and then they're going to get all that kind of fun going on there, and then they can go ahead and take it up to the next level if they want to, and whatever else, and just keep on damming up. And then effectively that damming up would then overspill, and they can empty this up, and they can run it into the reservoir there as well. So yeah, very quickly just getting rid of them, and the water flow will adjust back down to whatever it was. And this is why I like to keep it on the triple. Now at this point, I like to see what the situation would be in the event of a drought, and how much water is actually held and what greenery is left. So we're just going to go ahead and simulate that. So let's just activate the drought. The water sources will shut off, and this is the water that they'll be left with when the water has drained. We'll just give that a little bit of time. all of these little deep pools here, that's what's going to be left effectively, unless there's an area in the rocky section, which is nice. And that is a good amount of leftover water for the start of the game. They've got these tiny little sections, but if the player doesn't actually get to damming pretty quickly, they're going to run into problems. And the only thing that you need to really provide is the ability for them to dam some things at the very start of the game, even if it is just a tiny little water source. So if they have a stream that's coming down here that they can just dam quite easily with like 1 or 2 dams, then that's going to be ideal for the enjoyment that the player is going to get out of the actual of actually playing your map. So then in the event of a bad tide, obviously this is going to flow through and it's going to be really nasty water, and that is going to flush through all the bad, all of the good water, and we're just going to get this level of toxicity on the land, which is really, really good to see. And what's really good to see is that with the default setting of this river, so without any player damming or anything like that, there's actually nothing going on this top section here, which is perfect. Having that horrible like wasteland sort of effect, having that on their starting area, it might put players off, and so they might not be that interested in playing your map. Depending on who you're making your map for, whether it's going to be an easy, medium, or hard map to play. If it's hard, you can go ahead and just keep this water a little bit higher to keep the bad water effect on their land, and that'll be really, really good for the hard level of it. But the easy level of it, effectively, you want to keep it off their starting area with water that's easily dammable and things like that. So it just depends on how difficult you want to make your map. So we'll push all of that bad water out and we'll just get the good water back in, and we'll go ahead and start on this reservoir here now as well. And as soon as you see all of this go, then pretty much all the bad water is done. We've got a little pool here, which is quite interesting. And something that we could actually do with that is just off and up the way here, we could actually have something running into there, because we've got these 3 rocks blocking the actual effect of this being pushed out. And if we can keep one side of this river that's on bad water, because we're probably going to be putting in a little stream up here later on for the player, they've still got access to good water, but this really high amount of water that's here is actually toxic. They're not going to be able to use that, so it's just going to make their gameplay a little bit more difficult. So taking a look at this reservoir then, looking at it at default, we don't actually need to be blocking this off. So what we can actually go ahead and do here is, if we just delete these barriers, now that we've actually adjusted this, what we can actually go ahead and do is start looking at the depth of this. Now the first thing I'd like to do straight away is take back some of the edging of this so that it just makes it look a little bit more realistic for the player. We're going to take out quite a big section back here, like so, probably even more like that. Spinning around, we'll go ahead and do this as well, and sort of like that, I reckon. Okay, a little bit like that. Then we're going to add the depth to this. Now effectively this would normally be quite a deep reservoir. The player has the opportunity to take this right up. If they were to knock out this little section here, they could actually go ahead and do that. And what we could actually do, if we wanted to, is we could leave this as it is. We can take this, if we just pause this for a second, take this and have a one little thing here, put in a blockage. We'll go ahead and just put in 2 blockages there. And what the player can then do is, if they want to just flood this nice and easily, they can, but they do have to traipse way over to here to actually get that done. Or they can have the fun of damming the section off, filling it up, and having it flow out a different way. So the depth of this reservoir then, we've got a fortunate amount of size here, so let's just go ahead and drop this down quite roughly, a little bit like so, and then again in the middle, and I don't think we can go down anymore. Oh no, we can. Okay, fine. So it's all going to depend on this reservoir, guys, how deep you want to make it for the player to store however much water they want to be able to store. So I am going to probably do this similar to how I've done this top section here, mimicking the hardness level of the sort of terrain around it. Okay, so if we've got this sort of a step going on here, and then it comes in really close on that corner, it's coming a little bit further away there, it's coming up close here, and again further away here, and then up to this point we can have it coming nice and close as well. So then taking all of the extra blocks out, you've got that sort of shape like so, and again just mimicking this again. So we're going to come relatively close here, really up close over here, even as far as taking that bit back and that bit back. We've then got this random bit of land here. We're going to come in close, but then we're going to come away. And we're going to have it running relatively close over here as well. And then we'll get rid of all the extra blocks, see what we're left with, like so. And then we've just got a fairly obvious shape. We're just going to come relatively far away from all of these edges for this bottom floor now. A little bit like so. Sweet, just like that. Now this is where it gets interesting, okay? Now we're in the bad water update of this game. And if the player wanted to make this reservoir a good water spring, what they can actually do is cap off the bad water output and have this as a good water reservoir. So to start off with, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually introduce this reservoir as a bad water source, just at a rate of 2. So nothing too crazy. It's going to fill up. There's going to be a lot of bad water here. I might even take this down to 1.5. That's going to take quite a while to fill up, so we're just going to triple the speed here. And you're going to see that this is actually going to be a humongous reservoir for bad water. But we don't want it to actually flood this entire thing. So this is where we're going to come into a later video of water flow and water balancing. But we'll leave that there for now as it is. Now the joy of it is that what we can do is we can simulate what it would be like if it was a bad water source, but we had the good water spring running through this as well. So when this is a little bit more full, we'll go ahead and do that. Now with this initially being a bad water source, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to run a little channel through there. And I'm going to drop it down at this point because I want to make sure that it's running straight down into the deep section. I don't want this to be filling up all the way, because if the player needed the extra land and they want to come use this top section, hopefully not too much of it is going to be corrupted by the toxic bad water, which is what we're about to find out. Yeah, so only a little bit of that is actually taken up, which is not too bad at all. And we've just got this bad water feeding into this here. So we've actually got good water up until this point here. But after that, so if the player does dam past this point, they're actually going to be downing toxic water as well. So it's just limiting what they can actually do in the early stages of the game until they can actually dam this off or redirect it another way. Now the joy of this being so close to the edge is if the player did want to direct this off a different way, they can just shoot it off out of here by blowing this up with TNT, damming this, and then they've got an access to a good amount of bad water for pumping and creating all kinds of bits and bobs. But if they wanted to get rid of it, they can just come down here, cap it off, at the cost of obviously probably making their beavers toxic and eventually die if they don't actually cure them of the toxic bad water. I can't remember what the effect is, but that thing, yeah. So at this point, guys, we've got ourselves a really nice amount of good water coming through, and that has got a nice river to flow through with a nice rocky patch. We've got a nice bad water reservoir here. We probably wouldn't need to add much more bad water to the game, which is going to make it a little bit more interesting for the player, because if they do want bad water, they're going to have to use it. If they don't want it, they're not going to have access to it. So if they were to cap it off, they would just simply not have access, but they could actually just make like a temporary reservoir. They could just barricade this off and make a small rectangular reservoir if they wanted to, and then have the rest of it surrounded by water and have water flowing out. They could do all kinds of bits and bobs. And making your map have playable options in what the player could actually do is what's going to make your map more interesting to actually play on. So the only other thing that we need to do with the water guys at the moment is add something for players that just want a very easy experience with the game, and that is just going to be to add a very small stream that's going to feed into the rest of this here, okay? Now, one thing you can do with this is we can add a lot of height to it if we wanted to, so we could take it up and have it running through that kind of terrain and then have it running through all of this as well. And the problem with that is that the player's not going to have access to getting to that level of terrain at the early stages of the game. And with the fact that we're making this accessible to early stage game players is a key part of the information, in that we need to basically drop it into the ground as opposed to out of the ground. Coming back down to brush size 1, we're just going to cap off the end of that. And because it is just a little stream, we're just going to go ahead and take that right in there. They can put one down piece in here, so we're just going to cap that out as well. We'll probably make it a bit wider here. And this little river section, we could probably drop this down, and they can have it running down there like so. Popping in this water as a blockage, water source up in this top corner here. Just a strength of 1 would be absolutely fine. You could probably put it down to 0.5 if you wanted to, but that's going to give them a couple of options. So if they wanted a little bit more water, they could go ahead and chuck in their blockage here. and they can have this access to water then. Obviously that's going to overflow at this point. If they wanted to go ahead and have the resources available, they could just chuck it in a little bit higher up, but obviously they've only got this bit of water that they can use then as well. And giving them those options, that then couple of extra blocks of water in that early game is probably going to be quite beneficial to them, but obviously at the cost of extra logs to make them down. Now, when making a stream like this, guys, you can do a couple of little bits and bobs to make it a little bit more interesting for the players. And you can actually just go ahead and add little blocks in down here. And that way, when you get the likes of a drought, the area around the river still sort of stays a little bit dry. A little bit green, but obviously only down on that riverbed at the moment, by the look of it. There's all kinds of little bits and bobs to think about when creating these little bits for players. The other thing is that you can also drop the actual spring down a little bit as well, and have more of a far end and a good end. Now, we wouldn't want to block the opportunity for them to dam on a one block like this, so we're not going to drop that down. And the same for the 2 block situations here, here, and here. So we're probably not going to drop anything down here, but you could also go ahead and just drop them down in this section, so that if we just enable the water again and put our water source back in down here, that's going to fill up all of those. And then if we just dry it out again, they've still got a little bit more green going on. And now that we've got more deeper points here, the green is actually spread up as well, which is always nice. So they've got a little bit of farming capability up here, especially if they've gained access to this section over here. Obviously, it was wet a lot longer because we are on triple speed, so that was probably half a day's worth of time that they had that wet soil. And even that half a day is going to make quite the difference to their gameplay as well. Now, obviously, if of course they were to dam that up before the dry season came, it's just 2 dams, it's more than doable. If we had the wet season come back through, and then we had the dry season come back through, what's then going to happen is they're going to get all of this green left over with the dam. So it's going to push them to get the dams in, or a singular dam in, as soon as possible. It's going to be in their best interest. So as soon as the rest of it all dries out, and this bit's going to dry out shortly as well, I assume. And that's the green they're then left with. So they've even got quite a lot of green up here as well. And we would probably go ahead and give them access to the likes of this area, but we'd probably make it awkward for them on purpose and just put the stairs over here. Just so that way, if we've got our starting area up here, they've got to path all the way down here to get to the stairs, and then all the way up here just to put the dams in, just to make that starting area a little bit more difficult, just by adding the travel distance for their beavers. So simulating this then, so a dry season would effectively look a little bit like this. Let's just go ahead and get blockages just there. So a normal flowing wet season is just going to look like this on this map at this point. Then if we add the drought season, we're going to get this. Obviously everything then stops flowing. We've seen quite a lot of this at the moment. So then running into a bad water season, we're then looking at this, where obviously this is going to start running quite bad stuff as well, which is not going to be good. Now, you can do this in one of 2 ways. Because this is going to be their early game source of water, it's going to be beneficial for them to have a way of bypassing that so that they can keep an amount of good water, because otherwise their bad water season is going to be absolutely brutal. And the easiest way to do that is to literally just add this in going a different way. So if we were to do something a little bit like this, where we've just got this 1 block stream coming down here, and that is going up to there, what we're then going to want to make sure is that we can't really access that. So if we were to do a little bit, let's take it the other way actually, let's take it up like that. So then this stream is just running up this way, this water is just going to run up this way, and obviously that's running up there. But if the player has a blockage here anyway, a little bit like so, that's forcing more water to come through this way. But if they were to block off this with a controllable dam later on in the game, this water, if we actually run a dry season, a normal wet season, just like so, and if we just get rid of this, quite difficult to simulate this without the actual dams. If we were to just have this running through, a little bit like so, then let's say we block this off here as a normal player would, it wouldn't be much harder for them to chuck in another dam here, which is always going to be quite nice for them. So then let's say they were to do that and they were to block this off. Let's slow it down slightly. So let's say they block this off, and what's then going to happen is that this area would fill up till it got to the height of 0.5, which is what their dam would give them. And then let's say that we had a dam that was here, but it was controllable on height, so you could drop it down to 0, or you could drop it down to keep it up to 1. But then let's say that this dam up here was also controllable, and they released that. All of this water has got the capability to run down this nice little narrow stream here. We hit a bad season. The player is then going to be able to keep this good water section here. Despite the land being a little bit toxic, they have got access to this section here. Well, they did. It's going to make it hard. They've got this section up here as well, which is going to be very beneficial. And they've got that little buffer of good water whilst it lasts during that first or second bad water season, until they've got the capability to dam further and with more capability as well. Obviously, when they get to dynamite, what they can actually do is they can blow out one of these here and have a controllable dam there, controlling this little water source here as well. They could extend this dam and they could have something running up here to give them more water. They can put irrigation blocks in, so if they were to have these blocks here with the irrigation blocks, they gain this land back, and obviously any of the toxicity disappears around here. So there's loads of different things that you're giving your player the opportunity to do with those with this small section just here. But it's super important to give them the opportunity to do all of these things, otherwise they're either going to get bored or not enjoy your map as much. So you've got to think about all these kind of things when creating a custom map, just as the developers would have thought of. The developers would make a map with all of their game features in mind, so that you could do everything in the game to its maximum potential to some extent, other than the harder maps, which really make you think more on how to use those features as well. So there we go, guys. That is probably going to be the basics on how to run some water in, varying depths of water as well. Depths of lakes and reservoirs, what you can use lakes and reservoirs for, and obviously starting area streams and little bits and bobs like that as well. And obviously, if you wanted to make this a little bit more interesting, guys, you can do the same thing where you can just chop away little random bits to make it a little bit more of a different shape. You can also drop it down in level as well, so if you wanted to add a couple of pools along here, just like so that when the water does run through, it's just going to look a little bit more different. And it just doesn't look like a straight line, because straight line streams where you've just got that sort of a thing, they just don't look that great in my opinion. And so if you can change those up, it's just going to make your map look a little bit more interesting as well. But there we have it, guys. That is going to be the second part of this little tutorial series that I'm doing on water depth, rivers and lakes. So guys, come back for the third episode, and that is going to be on terrain height and smoothing of the terrain as well.